Peter Christopher. I've said before that Phil and Val Mason recommended Peter to me, so thanks to both of them, one in absentia, but Phil's still with us at the moment. So, bio for Peter Christopher, OAM. Okay, Peter is the director of the volunteer and not-for-profit Clipper Ship City of Adelaide Limited, the organisation set up to save the historic ship. Peter convened the first meeting aimed at saving the ship in July 2000 and is still actively involved. I must admit, I didn't realise it's been going since 2000. That's quite a feat. Prior to retiring in 2015, Peter was the Chief Industrial Officer of the Public Service Association. Peter has broad maritime interest and has dived on and researched shipwrecks and paddle steamers throughout Australia. He is the author of 7 published books on shipwrecks and riverboats and co-author of a City of Adelaide activity book. And Peter's also got some things over here if you'd like to have a look after the meeting. As a director of the ship project, Peter has played a key role in saving the ship and getting it to Adelaide. His next objective is the creation of a seaport village in Port Adelaide with the City of Adelaide as its centrepiece, which sounds fantastic project to do. So on that note, I'd like to introduce Peter Christopher, OAM, I've got to throw that in again, okay, to talk on the Clipper Ship City of Adelaide. So thank you, Peter.
Thank you for the invitation to be here tonight, and first of all, congratulations on a meeting of this size. I get to speak to a lot of organisations and historical societies, and it'd be fair enough to say that most of them struggle to get 15 to 20 people, and to actually have this number in a club and active is a tribute to all of you. So that's great. What I'd like to do tonight is to give you an overview of what's been a very, very large project. Now, fortunately, we've gotten to a midnight, I've been told, so we'll fit it all in. There's really 3 different parts to what I want to talk about tonight, and by the very nature of trying to cover what I'm doing, it's going to be a snapshot and really glossing over. It has to be, because you could literally spend an entire night just on one element. And the 3 elements really are the ship itself, the physical structure and things about it, the passengers and crew and all the social history that goes with that, and the 3rd element is the campaign to save it and what we're doing now. And as I said, each of those 3 are in a sense discrete, but they all overlap. I should say, in coming here tonight, it was an easy address to find. Some of the books I've got over here for sale are written by Ron Roberts, and Ron was a descendant of passenger Nankaro who came out on the ship and went to the copper mines. And Ron's passed away now, but I spent many hours at his home doing research and chatting. And I think this is 22B cow, and he was number 38. So it's actually, as soon as I saw the address, I said, okay, that's a good start. I'm not going to get lost getting there tonight. Okay, let's talk about the ship. City of Adelaide, sorry, just make sure I've got this pointing in the right direction first, was a 3-masted composite clipper. It was built in Sunderland, northeast England, 1864. So it's 160 years old this year. It's 244 feet long, and in maritime, imperial is the recognised standard to use. It was capable of carrying 300 passengers. The painting you see there on the top right shows the 3 enormous masts, and to give you an idea of scale, the main mast and the foremast stand 40 metres above the top deck. So it's, we're not talking something small. It's what's known as a composite. There are only 2 left in the world today. The world famous Cutty Sark and City of Adelaide. We're 5 years older and in much better condition. And a composite is a ship with an iron frame and a wooden hull. So that's what distinguishes. There were very few of them built because you went through the era of wooden sailing ships, and then they started building iron ships and then iron steamships. So there's only a very narrow changeover period where they went from wooden sail to iron steam, and in that narrow couple of decades in between, they built the composite vessels. You said only 2 survive today. The genealogists in the group have calculated that something like 250,000 people can have their heritage traced back to this ship. And if you look at the fact it did 23 return journeys and it was capable of carrying 300 people, you start getting an idea where those figures are coming from. Many of you will be familiar with the name Waite, the Waite Institute, Bray House. Matilda Methuen came out on the ship's maiden voyage in 1864 to marry her fiancé, Chaponeau Peter Waite. They had 8 kids, 4 of them survived. They each went on to have their own kids, grandkids, etc., etc. So just from one passenger, you can actually track down generation after generation, getting larger and larger. So when you start to look at figures like 250,000, you start to see where those sort of figures emerge. Now, you'll be pleased to know I'm not going to run through the other 249,999, but a couple I do want to refer to are George and Annie Wilcox. They have very, very strong links to Gawler. They developed property here. They also, in Adelaide, built Eynesbury House. Many of you are familiar with the top end of Unley Road at Mitcham. And they did many journeys backwards and forwards. And in fact, on one occasion, Annie gave birth to her son George 30 days out from reaching London on a return journey. You'll be pleased to know he was actually named George Seaborn Wilcox. And their great-great-grandson, Gavin Wilcox, well into his 90s now, lives in Sydney and is a great supporter, as is his family. And they have provided us a whole range of things, many of which we have on display. Small personal artefacts that were carried by passengers at the time. We've got things which George and Annie Wilcox held in their hands 160 years ago on display in the ship. We also have some items like very large paintings. We're talking art gallery quality, which we can't currently display because we don't have facilities good enough to look after them properly. So once again, lots of quite interesting history there. Now I thought I'd throw this in. I have to admit I didn't know what an acrostic was. And for those of you who can't read the fine print from back there, an acrostic is a poem where the first letter at the start of each paragraph forms a name going down. So in this case, each paragraph starts with the letters G-A-W-L-E-R. Now, I'm not going to read the whole lot, but let me just try to read it from here. But the first one is, good friend I have on board this ship. I scarce know what to call her. Her most appropriate title is the Lady Fair from Gawler. And it goes on in that vein. So once again, it's in many ways people think the ship project is about the timber and iron of the ship. It is far more than that. It's about the social history and the social fabric and things like this, just lovely, together with diaries and other stuff that are available. Now, the ship was built by Captain David Bruce, a Scotsman. He built the ship because he previously ran another ship in Adelaide called the Irene, and he realised that there was a business opportunity for a fast ship that could carry passengers from England to Adelaide. So he commissioned and had built the City of Adelaide. At the time it was built, it was still rated by Lloyd's as experimental. That's how novel the concept was. But to give you an idea of the importance of a composite, wooden ships of the kind that you used to prior to this, think Flinders, think Cook, think all the early passenger ships to Australia, they had a bow on them that was shaped a bit like a bathtub. It would push through the water at about 4 or 5 knots. With a composite, they weren't limited by the shape of the timber, so they would build a frame that was like a spear or an arrow and then attach the timber to it. So instead of having a ship that could do 4 or 5 knots, the City of Adelaide was capable of 17. I mean, that is just an enormous step forward. Now, it generally travelled at around 10 because of the comfort of passengers, whereas the Cutty Sark, which was almost identical, still holds all these speed records because it carried freight. And so nobody cared about the comfort of the crew, it just went flat out and went at that maximum speed. But even at the 10 knot speed rather than 4 or 5, it still was able to do the journey from England to Adelaide non-stop in about 2.5 months. Have any of you flown to England? Quick show of hands. Okay. Have any of you travelled in the day when Emirates started flying out of Adelaide direct to London? Okay. I know I'm one who did at the time. I had all sorts of reasons for being in Scotland, you might understand. But one of the key things about Emirates is that by going Emirates as compared to Qantas or Singapore or any of the others, it actually got me to London 6 hours earlier. And I was prepared to make a choice to change airlines in order to save 6 hours. Imagine if by changing a ship, you could save 2.5 months. That's really what the choice people made. And it's why the City of Adelaide was so successful and why it was strongly built and lasted. Yeah, so quite amazing. Now, the photo on the right, descendants of David Bruce, the woman in the middle, great-great-granddaughter Pam Whittle, unfortunately no longer with us, but even there she's, I think, in the late 80s. That's the stairs necessary currently to get into the ship. We're currently trying to sort out some lift access at the moment, but we're a volunteer non-government body, etc. And we're talking about $250,000 for a lift. So we're trying to sort that out. The 2 daughters you see there, Julia and Meredith, are volunteers aboard the ship every week. We have a roster. We're open 7 days a week, except when it's 36 or more, so we're closed for the next 4 days. And they form part of the team of guides that take people through. Okay, this shows the route out, and importantly, the earlier ships had to call into Rio, they had to call into Cape Town, they had to call into Western Australia, because their journey took so long. The City of Adelaide could do the journey so fast that it actually did it non-stop. So, which in itself is quite amazing. There's lots of other information on there which I won't go into, but on that particular one there's a number of little coffins. There was an outbreak of scarlet fever, so there were 8 deaths involving mainly little children and in some cases their mums cross-infecting. There was a fire on board. So all this is based on a diary kept by James McLaughlin in 1874. Fortunately for us, he kept details of things like latitude and longitude. Quite different from some of the diaries the women kept. So we get different information out of each of them. There was one diary where for the first time we actually had colours described, which was, I won't say typical, but it's what you perhaps now expect from a woman writing in a diary that a male would, which was terrific to have access to both the technical and non-technical. Moving on, the ship survived not only because it was incredibly strongly built, but because of what it did when it stopped sailing. So it was built in 1864. In 1893, it was no longer commercially viable. It faced being broken up. Southampton needed a new hospital for people with infectious diseases. So they bought the ship, stripped it of its masts, all its fittings, took out a couple of 100 tonnes of concrete ballast, moored it in the Test River at Southampton, and for the next 30 years it was an isolation hospital, a quarantine ship, and so it meant the ship survived. In 1923 they no longer needed it. It faced being broken up. Fortunately for the ship, the Royal Navy bought it. They towed it up to Scotland, commissioned it as a warship, renamed it HMS Carrick. It was already in Adelaide in the fleet, so that avoided confusion. Renamed it HMS Carrick, and naval cadets lived on board and did gunnery training. And in 1942, the ship actually saw action while moored in Glasgow, where its guns were fired in anger. So, just quite an amazing history. Post-war, it went to the Navy Reserves, became club rooms, basically a floating bar. It sank about 30 odd years ago, sank 3 times actually, but the last time it didn't get up. And the Scottish Maritime Museum salvaged it and moved it from Glasgow to Irvine, where they were based, with the intention of restoring it and doing work on it. Well, a lot of good intentions, no money, no capacity. The ship eventually became derelict. When they'd saved it, they moved it onto land, which wasn't museum land, but on a privately owned slipway next to the museum. Unfortunately, they hadn't paid any rent for 10 years. Irvine was growing, the landowner wanted his land back, wanted this damn ship removed so he could sell his property. And so the Scottish Maritime Museum reluctantly applied for permission to delist its heritage status so they could break the ship up. That's when in July 2000 we started our campaign to say, not going to let you do it. And we just grew from there. And interestingly enough, when we started the campaign, we believed we were starting a worldwide campaign to maintain its heritage listing so it would be saved and it would remain in Scotland. We didn't at that point envisage it ever coming to Adelaide. The Duke of Edinburgh in 2001 then convened a conference in Glasgow to say, look, the problem still exists. You've got the ship still here, the landowner still wants his land, the heritage status hasn't been removed, so we can't break it up. Just what are we going to do? And there were about 24 people at the meeting, mainly government officials, but there were 2 others there who weren't government officials. One was my counterpart from Scotland, from Sunderland, where the ship was built. The other was myself. And we were the only ones putting a case to save the ship. One of the outcomes we got from the conference was that whoever came up with the engineering means of moving the ship and the money to do it and all the other permissions that were necessary could actually have the ship. So that's what actually gave the authority for the ship to leave the UK, which meant we could then come back to Adelaide and start knocking on doors and saying, hey, we're fundraising, and people weren't saying to us, look, why would we waste our time? They'll never leave Scotland, because we actually had a formal resolution signed off by the Duke of Edinburgh, no less, that was giving the official permission to leave. The other thing we got is that in going around door knocking, like I say, it doesn't do any harm when you're taking a portfolio around to businesses and others and saying, we'd like some support and we'd like some money and anything else you can give. When you've got letters there on Buckingham Palace letterhead saying we wish you well and good luck. It certainly helped lubricate some of the channels we had to navigate. So yeah, that was interesting. This is one of the times when it sang. Now those masks, by the way, are not the real masks. They were just pretend masks put on after it went from being a hospital ship, just so it looked a bit real. They're so small by comparison, they're almost toothpicks. Okay, who are we? Who is the clipper ship City of Adelaide Limited? We are a non-government body. We're 100% volunteers. We're a not-for-profit organisation and we're tax deductible. We have about 70 active volunteers, desperately looking for more if anyone's looking for anything to do, and that could range from tour guides to trades work to genealogical work to help with databases. You know, if you've got time, we've got the job. But that's, in a nutshell, who we are. The coat of arms you see there is the coat of arms of, it's what's on the Adelaide Town Hall. So it's the city's coat of arms. That's the current day version. A little bit later, I'll show you what we've now got on the ship, which is a replica of the 1864 version of that. Okay, here we are in Scotland. The way we moved the ship, the authorities in Scotland and the rest of the UK believed they were being forced to break the ship up because they did not believe it was possible for the ship to be moved without it being destroyed in the process. They simply couldn't conceive a way of it. Well, I'll ask you a question, and I think you'll find the answers a bit simpler than all the authorities in the UK thought. Quick show of hands, how many have ever been shopping and bought a dozen eggs? We can pleased to see some of the guys put their hands up too. So how do you get the eggs home? How do you move the eggs around? In a carton. Yeah, you don't move the eggs, you move the carton. What the engineers and naval architects in our group did was designed a 100-tonne steel, $1 million value giant egg carton. It was designed in parts like a giant Meccano set. It was built by about 24 engineering firms all over the state, including Aaron's from nearby here, various others in different parts of the state. We shipped it over in 5 shipping containers, excavated, built it under and around the ship. So we didn't move the egg, we moved the egg carton. So the ship was never touched by us in a sense. Every bit of pressure, every bit of movement related to moving the 100-tonne steel cradle, and it just simply happened to have the ship sitting in it. Now, there's a bit more work went into its design than I'm oversimplifying. There were laser surveys undertaken. Every bit of the cradle was designed to fit the exact spot it had to go under the ship. We're talking down to millimetres. Now, a couple of things here. The square windows you see there are not original. They were cut in when the ship was a hospital ship in order to allow light into where the patients were. They're totally unseaworthy. But by that stage, so much weight had been removed from the ship that the ship was riding very high, and also it was not going to sea anyway. The safe waterline, by the way, many of you might be familiar with the Plimsoll line. This ship was built pre-Plimsoll, but the equivalent of that was what's known as Lloyd's Rule. To give you an idea where that was halfway up those square windows. So anything below that would be underwater. So that just gives you a bit of a context. Now, that little bit of mechanical aid you see there must be the smallest bit of everything that was on site. There must have been a dozen. We hired a firm and imported equipment from Holland because they had all the necessary equipment and the skill to use it. So over a period of about 12 months, the excavation under the ship occurred, the cradle got put under it. You can see by the men standing under it in the red and the yellow, just a bit of a scale there. Okay, from there, The cradle was jacked up a metre and a half. We then brought in what they refer to as self-propelled modular transporters, SPMTs. It's the type you see moving ships and submarines around. We had to bring them in from all over England and all over Europe just to have enough of them. I think we finished up with something like 386 of these wheels, each weighing over a tonne. You know, it was just an enormous exercise, and you can just see the rows of them there. The other little minor exercise we had to do was to put in a bridge between the land and a barge, because we weren't allowed to excavate the river to bring the barge right in because of environmental concerns in the river. So there's a few things going on. And bearing in mind, this is all by volunteers. You know, I'm not a technical type. I'd go over for negotiations and things like that. But I'd take time off from work, take a bit of leave, go over, come back. The technical types would go over, they'd spend time supervising this sort of thing, doing all that. So, and those people are still involved today. Okay, now on the way back, once we had the ship on the barge, we then stopped at Greenwich on the River Thames, where His Royal Highness officially renamed the ship back to its original name. So it went from being City of Adelaide to HMS Carrick to Sailing Vessel Carrick back to City of Adelaide. And that's the renaming ceremony occurring in Greenwich at the time. And I think we had half the world's media there. I like to think it was because of the ship. The possible presence of the chap in the overcoat might have had a bit to do with it. Okay. From there we went to Holland, in the Netherlands. We went to two places. First of all, in Dordrecht, the vessel had to be shrink wrapped. When you've been overseas, you come back into the country, you go through customs, you go through quarantine, you come back from your trip to Bali, you get a little wooden carving, and somebody at the quarantine desk looks at it for insects and make sure it's all okay. And so the question you get asked, excuse me, sir, excuse me, madam, are you carrying any timber? We just had a few hundred tonnes of the stuff. So we did 3 separate cleaning jobs in Europe. We also flew ATWA's government inspectors over to check it out and look at it. And finally, in Dordrecht, the entire ship was shrink wrapped and then chemically fumigated internally by an Adelaide firm we flew over to do the job with ATWA's supervision. So everything, what we didn't want to do is have the ship arrive off the coast of Outer Harbour and somebody said, stop, you can't come in. So, and all this we're paying for along the way. Now, once that was done, it was then moved to Rotterdam, where the ship was picked up by those 2 750-tonne cranes you see on heavy lift ship Palliper. And the City of Adelaide, you can just see, is that white ghost between the 2 cranes stretching along the length of the ship. It was one of the few ships on the planet large enough to pick up our load. We had to use this method rather than the float-on, float-off that you sometimes see in big documentaries where they sink a ship and an oil rig goes on, because while Rotterdam was deep enough, the Port River wasn't. So it might have worked at one end but not both ends. Okay, from there we moved the ship off the heavy lift ship Palliper onto the barge Bradley, the green barge on the right there. That lift there is the largest lift ever undertaken by cranes in Port Adelaide. So you're looking at over 600 tonnes being suspended in the air there. We bought the barge as a temporary home because at this stage government had agreed to give us the space to put the ship, but we were in fierce, let's say, negotiations over the spot it would go. They wanted to give us a bit of land. If the ship was that big, they wanted to give us a bit of land that was about that big. The ship deserved it better than that. So We just point blank didn't play ball. So by having the ship on the barge, it gave us tremendous flexibility. It meant we were able to move it around, keep it moored in the water. If we were required to move it from one location to the other, we did. And currently it's in Dock 2 at Port Adelaide, which is its fourth home. In the meantime, what we've negotiated with government is we have 20,000 square metres at Dock 2 at Port Adelaide, and we have the option to buy about half that amount again. And the idea being, we just don't want a ship that sits there like a wooden statue. We want a live seaport village. So if any of you have been to Sovereign Hill and Ballarat, think of a maritime version of that. So what you're going to have is the ship on land and then all these other activities around it. So the idea is to build a tourism destination, and the logic of that is the money we make charging people to go on board is never going to pay for the work the ship needs. We'll continue to find other ways of generating income, but part of the way is to have a vibrant seaport village where we lease out certain franchises. You know, we'll have a coffee shop there and various other things to generate income, which will then go towards the ship. We're also looking at developing part of Dock 2 as a commercial hub with maritime themed activities of a commercial nature, which will generate rental income for us. So there's a very detailed business plan behind everything I'm fairly flippantly describing. Okay, here we are at the commissioning of the replica coat of arms. Remember the one you saw earlier on? Did any of you pick the differences between this coat of arms and the current day one? The kangaroo, yeah. There's two things about the kangaroo. Here it's facing over its shoulder and it's grey. Today it's red facing forwards. There are a few other minor differences. But, yeah. And we've got Sir James Hardy there and Martin Hazy doing the official unveiling. That's really the only limited amount of external work we've done on the ship. One of the difficulties with having the ship on a barge is it's very difficult to access it with heavy machinery or cranes because the barge goes up and down with the tide and in and out with the wind. And so most of the work we've done has been actually inside the ship rather than outside. Okay, this photo was taken in June last year, and it's very, very significant because if you look closely, you can see under the ship. The whole ship has been jacked up 1.5 metres in readiness for us moving it onto land. So we finished up buying 10 huge jacks from overseas, setting up 10 jacking points under the ship, jacked it up, stabilised it, and it's now just waiting for the self-propelled modular trailers to come in to take the load and move it onto land. Fortunately for us, the subcorp, ASC, is just down the road from where we are, and they've decided to do a training exercise on the day that we need the ship moved. That saves us $250,000, which we're eternally grateful. But yeah, once again we've done that. But interestingly enough, coming back to how we operate commercially, we finished up buying these 10 jacks. We're only one of 2 organisations in Australia that now has that lifting capacity and the engineering skill to use it. We're already getting companies, including from interstate, wanting to hire it from us. So that's how we start to generate income. So it was a big outlay. We'd take out loans to do it. You know, it's $100,000 worth of equipment. We've only got to loan it out, rent it out a couple of times, and we've covered our income. So we run it as if we're a business. Everybody's a volunteer. The only difference between us and a multi-million-dollar operation is they get paid and we don't. But the scale of how we operate, and I think the professionalism with which all the volunteers act, reflects that. There it is, checked up with a better view under it. believe it, that little yellow piece at the top. As I said, there's 10 of those. We're talking $100,000 worth of equipment. Okay, now, looking inside the ship, the chap on the right of the wheel there is Gavin Wilcox, who I referred to earlier, who's been a great supporter and has donated, quite a number of things to us. Sadly, his wife passed away a couple of years ago. In the top right, we have a Bible there, which was owned by Captain Alexander Bruce, who was one of the 3 Bruce family members who was a captain. He retired to Adelaide, which meant his descendants are here in Adelaide, but also his property. So Pam Whittle and her 2 daughters are Alexander Bruce's granddaughter and great-granddaughters, and the Bible is their family Bible. The display down the bottom reflects its period as a hospital ship. Now, we also have a goiter display in the ship. Goiter himself didn't travel on the ship, but his wife and kids did. And one day while the tour group was going through, they saw some reference to goiter in some publicity material, and they said, "Oh, we're goiter descendants. Would you like some goiter stuff?" And a week later they turn up with this cabinet. It's a pretty poor photo, unfortunately, but there's an 1860s theodolite. There's a chain with 100 links. There's blankets that the Cameleers used when they went up north. So once again, that's the type of quality of the display that's visible there. On the right-hand photo, it's not a very good photo once again, but we've placed when you go into the ship, you go into the main area that was home to 270 second-class passengers. The photo on the right is down below that in the cargo hold. We've now got a proper walkway in there. We take tours in there. We have dinners in there. We've had concerts in there. The company that does ghost tours in Adelaide even hires us as a venue, and that's one of their favourite spots. Okay, up above is the first class saloon area. The saloon deck was in such poor condition that we actually finished up having to remove it and replace it all. Unfortunately, directly above it, the poop deck is where guns had been mounted. And when the guns were removed, that area wasn't looked after properly. The timbers inside were softwood timbers, not hardwood timbers, because they were internal, not external. So by the time we got it, they were in poor condition. So we started a project in 2016 to do an online fundraising appeal to start raising money to buy timber. We've effectively now completed that only in the last month or so. So the entire saloon deck now looks like what you see on the top right there. We didn't use the original 75mm Oregon, but we went for a laminated approach. So it looks authentic from above and below, but it's not easy to get 75mm Oregon. You've generally got to import it from Canada. It's heavy and it's expensive. This looks authentic, and it's also what they've done with the Cutty Sark, so we don't feel that we're too far a step. We've also got 2 replica cabins that are in there. Those cabins are roughly 2 metres by 2 metres. Since that photo was taken, they've since been painted. They'll be a mixture of white and green and scarlet and gold. So, very, very flashy. We have a diary account of a family of 5 sharing one of those cabins. So mum and dad in the bottom bunk, 3 kids, top and tail in the top bunk. And I remember taking somebody around from the subcorp a couple of months back and showed him inside the cabin. And just happened to remark about how remarkable I thought it was that, here's a diary account talking of a family of 5. And he just burst out laughing and said, "Oh, on the sub, we'd fit 12 in here." It's all relative. Okay, coming towards the end, this is us today. The ship is on the barge. Dock 2 is the land you see there. Shed 13, which is the right hand of the sheds, is part of our property. So our current peppercorn lease with government occupies from the river up to halfway between the two sheds, from the wharf edge up to the Diver Derrick Bridge. So that's 20,000 square metres, and we also have the option to buy the rest. And we're in some loan negotiations about doing it. The shed currently is our workshops, our offices, all that sort of stuff. And this is our information centre. We also have a gallery there. And in between those two rows of cars is where the ship is going to be moved to. And this is the progress being made. So the pit's been excavated. It's now in the process of having 10 concrete pads put in. We put the 7th in on Wednesday this week. So we're only a few weeks away from the next 3 going in. And then eventually the ship will be moved from there, taken, well, the wheels will go onto the barge, pick up the ship, bring it out between the two sheds, come around here, roll it down into the pit, sit it there, and then once the wheels are out, we're back from the pit and do all that. What we're also then looking to do is to put a lift over here against that wall. We're meeting with architects tomorrow morning to finalise whether it's going to be inside the shed or outside the shed, and then having a walkway from that lift out to the ship. So we're very keen to do that. And we're currently in negotiations with a Victorian-based philanthropic organisation that looks like it's going to come to the party on the lift. So that's sort of where we are at the moment. It gives you a bit of a sense of space and idea where we are. The vision is to develop this area as a seaport village, ship on land there. All this area here is a seaport village with all sorts of activities going on around it. And that dream is very quickly being realised. To put it in context, we're looking at the ship being in that pit on land within the next 3 months. I mean, we're not talking Never Land. We currently have a tentative date. We're looking in early May, which, subject to a couple of things here or there, but it's, you know, we're looking as close as that. The other thing which is going to be really important is this is Dock 2. Up there is Dock 1. The government's putting in a bridge, pedestrian bridge, across the mouth of Dock 1. What that will mean is there'll be direct pedestrian access between Port Adelaide and the Red Lighthouse and where we are. So that's going to make that whole question of access a hell of a lot better. And that, as they say, is that. Thank you. Subject to your timetable, I'm happy to take questions, comments.
Just a comment. I'm a subscriber to 2 British heritage magazines. Now, the character that was named then was subject to many surveys, and I don't think one survey came up as being a viable sailing option. I congratulate you in actually managing to save them, because apparently it was a basket case according to all surveyors. Just to comment on the museum, I've just recently come back from Belfast. The Titanic Museum with its audio, visual and 3D.
Sorry, I'm just grabbing more water.
So the Titanic Museum is just something that's just so emotional and so wonderful. The only thing lacking is the damn ship. But that's just a comment. I congratulate you on dispelling all the surveyors. I swung by in 2007, I think, in Irvine. I think it was 2007. Just to have a look at the basket case that I do.
Yeah, look, when the naval architects and others looked at it, what they say, it's all in the eyes of the beholder. You can look at it as a crumbling wreck, or you can think of it as a great thing to be saved. And when it's, with all due respects to government economists and accountants, their view of the world is somewhat different than those of us who have historical interest in the world. And frankly, they, for the sake of dollars, were prepared, or in their case pounds, were prepared to have a ship broken up. Whereas, I'm not saying our people are geniuses. I mean, I like to think they are. But they came up with a plan to do it. And the difference was a difference of approach. We not only looked at ways of doing it, but ways of trying to fund it and doing all sorts of things. Whereas their approach was, I imagine people had possibly thought of a cradle and that, but they didn't go to the next step. That is, how do you fund it if government doesn't give you the money? You know, in our case, we did the hard work to get the money. You know, it wasn't just delivered.
Dr. Easton has just left the room, unfortunately, but he gifted something to your organisation. Would you like to explain what it was and why?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't see him. I didn't. Please pass on my apologies for not speaking to him.
No, you have to leave early, otherwise you get locked down.
No, but I hadn't realised he was even here. I'm sitting here with his glare and straight in my eyes. So. No, what happened is his great-grandfather built a model ship about yay long. And the significance of it is that there were not many cameras around at that time. And so even though the person who built it was a sailor, not a model maker, not an expert model maker, it is a sufficiently good model of the ship to actually recognise different features on it, including where lifeboats were and where animals were and all that type of thing. And it's in a proper glass case and the whole bit. And as people arrive, that's one of the first things that people see there. He also gifted us a collection of media clippings that he'd personally collected over a long period of time, which now also form part of a collection and what we have as part of everything we do. It's and he and his family came down about a year ago now and actually presented it. They had we were going to do it many years ago when Bruce went from his family home into care, and that happened to be right at the COVID high point. So his family were located in Western Australia and Victoria, and the event was so significant, it was all delayed until everybody could be here. And when we did it, we had a great ceremony down at the ship. People, had to look around, spoke to people. It's all recorded. We, they did tours of the ship and the whole bit. Yeah, so that's a great bit of our material that we'll display going forwards. And our displays will continue to improve. Currently, we tend to receive things and we fit them where we can. We tend to operate out of shipping containers and things like that, which are fair enough. But something like Bruce Eastick's model deserves far better than that. And as we move the ship onto land and start converting Shed 13 into the main display area, it gives us the capacity to mount some really professional displays.
He took pride place in his home office. He also had cabinets.
Yeah.
I thought the connection was because some of the early Eastic ancestors came out on the ship. Was that part of the story? Or?
Look, there was. We haven't been able to find an Eastic passenger name on the vessel. One of the difficulties with tracking passengers, particularly if it's a female passenger, and they marry and change names, that causes issues there. What we do know is Charles Eastick was a seaman, and he was a seaman at the time the City of Adelaide was sailing. To the best of what we can establish, he would have been on a ship that saw the City of Adelaide and did it, but we can't definitively. I'd love to be able to say, yeah, he was on it, but from a historical perspective, the best we can say is he may have been on it, but he also may have been on another ship that observed it.
What was the time frame that one of the immigrants could be on the boat for? How long was the journey?
The quickest journey was 67 days. Normally it was around 2.5 months, depending on weather. It could be up to 3, and that's contrasting to the earlier wooden ships that were, generally 4.5 to 6 months. So still fast, but they'd be on there for that time. And when you to give you a bit of a feel for it, imagine this crowd you've got here now, and that's about the amount of space you've got for 3 months. You could go up to the open deck above, which is about the length of this room and maybe half the width, but also there were masts there was a galley, there were lifeboats, there were cattle, there were chooks. So a lot of the time you'll be spending sitting inside on your bunk in a dark, smelly area, often shoulder to shoulder with your fellow passengers, except for the time you've got to go, unless you're travelling first class, which you had a bit more space, you had access to the poop deck. Okay, any questions, comments?
What did the vessel carry on the return trips?
Mainly wheat, wool and copper. The ship was quarter-owned by Henry Martin, who owned the Blinman copper mines in the Flinders Ranges. And so the only other port in Australia City of Adelaide ever went to was Port Augusta. So it would leave here, go up to Port Augusta, pick up copper. It would also take on wool and wheat, either here or in Port Augusta, and take that. In later years, it also started carrying back Barossa wine. One of the more interesting cargoes coming to Australia, next Tuesday, what day is it today? Thursday. Next Tuesday, I'm going to the 150th anniversary of Bigford's, the soft drink company. We have a bit of a link with them. The link we have with them is that 160 years ago, in 1864, Anne Bigford owned a pharmacy in Adelaide. She imported 3 casks of lime juice into Adelaide for her pharmacy, and it was also given to passengers to combat scurvy. And on the ship's register, it lists the Bigford lime juice, not cordial, being imported in for a pharmacy. It was then to be another 10 years before the Bigford Soft Drink Company evolved. So when you actually look at the top of their bottles, it actually says established 1874, hence the 150th celebration this year. But 10 years prior to that, Anne Bigford was importing lime juice into Adelaide on the City of Adelaide. Fascinating. Okay.
Do you have any journals of journeys on the boat?
Yeah. Some of them are on our website, quite a number of them. I think all of them are on the State Library of South Australia, list of diaries. I think there's about 8 diaries in all. There was one we got fairly recently from a lady called Mary Barnfeld, which we weren't aware of. And just out of the blue one day, got this email that said, "Hi, my name is X. I'm a descendant of Mary Barnfeld. I'm in England at the moment. I happen to be sitting here reading your diary. Would you be interested in a copy?" And she scanned it and sent it to us. That's if you go to our website, there's a series of menu items near the top, and under the history item, Mary Barnfeld's diary is in there. And that's one of the diaries I mentioned earlier on that actually for the first time describes colour. There's what's known as a dead horse ceremony, where when they cross the equator, they do this false horse up where they bash it until it all falls to bits and whatever. And there's all sorts of references in books. A number of us have read over the years about this ceremony. They all describe the event, but until we read Mary's diary, there was nothing that ever described the colour associated with it. She also travelled out with two young girls, I think 8 and 10, and she describes what they went through when they were sick, food they all ate. You know, in fact, in the Fun Facts and Activities book there, one of the activities we provide for kids to do is to create a menu, and the research material we give them are excerpts from Mary Barnville's diary where she discusses food, which helps the kids then prepare a menu as part of one of the challenges on different pages. Okay, any other questions? Otherwise I'll...
Just one quick one. How long did it take to bring it from Scotland to Adelaide?
The journey from Scotland to Adelaide was a bit interrupted, but we left Scotland in September 2013 and we arrived in Adelaide on the 3rd of February 2014. So you're talking, 5 months. But that time included a trip to America where in Norfolk, Virginia, the heavy lift ship picked up 6 200-tonne diesel locomotives which were brought over as extra freight inside the ship and offloaded at Port Hedland where they were in use by the mining industry. Given the heavy lift ship cost us $1.5 million to hire, anything we could do to offset the cost by doing it. So we didn't mind the delay because of the savings. So there was time spent in Norfolk, Virginia, there was time spent in Rotterdam through all the treatment and Dordrecht, and there was time spent in Port Hedland loading and offloading. But it's still not a long period of time. Look, what I'll do is, some of you may be feeling the heat and wanting to get somewhere cooler. Others of you may be wanting to rush over and buy things. And there's a table full of stuff there to buy, so I'll make sure I stand over there while I'm answering questions. But if anybody just wants to come over and chat, feel free to join me, and happy to chat for as long as anybody wants to chat. But I thank you for your interest and attention. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I came out in 1961 and it still took a month. And that's via the Suez Canal, and it was slightly better conditions. Okay, I'd like to invite Heather to come up and say a vote of thanks. Okay, thanks Heather.
Peter, on behalf of the history team, we'd like to thank you for sharing your knowledge this evening with us and the presentation. And I think everybody enjoyed that, and I think we can give you a round of applause. Yep. And I've got a little gift for you.
And I hope the chocolates haven't melted.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.